Hi. So here I am reporting from Aspen. I feel like this is Kate Howe reporting live from Aspen, Colorado on Paget's disease. So I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about Paget's disease. And what we're going to talk about is, first of all, what is it? Well, it's a deformity of the bone that occurs generally later in life, mostly to a white population. There have been 2 reported incidents of it happening in Asian people. Both were women. One was 91 when it was reported. So it doesn't generally affect African Americans or Asian population quite as much as it does the European population. And what happens, basically one scientist described it as osteoblast gone wild. So what happens is, over time, they think it's a genetic deformity. It's either genetic or you're predisposed to catching a virus that probably your parents were also predisposed to catching, if that makes sense. In other words, they're not really sure. But what happens is the osteoblasts just start laying down bone and laying down bone and laying down bone, and the bone is very, very dense and thick, and it's highly vascular. And so it doesn't have the same type of structure as regular healthy bone does. And generally it only affects one bone. The main bones that are affected are the cranium, the long bones of the arm, and the long bones of the legs. And as the disease develops, oftentimes there's no signs or symptoms until the disease is very much pronounced. And so oftentimes what happens is there will just be like pain and heat in the long bones, or you'll start to get some facial deformities. And then it's pretty obvious that something's going on. I'm going to introduce you guys in a little bit to a really cool dude who lived in 990 AD, or he died in 990 AD. His name is Ergol, and he was a Viking. And they think that he suffered from Paget's disease, and he's my case study that I'll share with you as soon as we get through the signs and symptoms and those kinds of things. So later on, as the disease progresses, you can have deafness and blindness, because especially if it's affecting your cranial bones, or your spine, because as those osteoblasts lay down more and more and more and more bone and make it thick and dense and hard, it starts to impinge the nerve, and so the nerve root. And so what happens is, of course, when the nerve root gets impinged, you can't see or hear. They get dizzy, irritable, fatigue, so cold feet and hands, bad circulation in the extremities. And what's interesting is that Ergol, our case study, suffered from all of these symptoms. And the reason that we know he suffered from all of these symptoms was because not only was he a warrior, but he was also a poet. So in this beautiful Icelandic verse, Ergol recorded for us all of his signs and symptoms. Now, he lived to be 91 years old, which is pretty old for a Viking, especially a Viking warrior. And one of the things that's really interesting is that his skull was reported to have resisted blows from an axe. And, everybody knows that, of course, this is not possible. But there's a story that's told. His skeleton was exhumed twice. And this information I found from, somebody just drove by and waved at me. So this information I found from a 1995 Scientific American article. And it was really interesting. So his bones were exhumed twice. And when they were exhumed, the second time, they were looking at his skull. And I have a picture of a skull that is similar to Ergol's, but not his own. And so the story goes that the priest that exhumed it was curious about if the legends about Ergol were true, that his head could really resist the blow to an axe. So his skeleton had been buried for 150 years. And the priest took this axe and swung it at the skull, and the bone blanched and turned white where the axe hit, but it didn't actually split the skull or dent it. And so people, of course, have said, well, now, that's impossible. So people have said that's impossible, right? You're going to hit a 150-year-old skull with an axe, it's going to break. And so there was a lot of question about whether the myths about, or legends about Icelandic warriors and Viking warriors were accurate or not, or whether they were simply legends, you know, the stuff of folk tales. And what this professor hypothesizes, and it's very well supported by his research, is that it's probably true because Ergel suffered most likely from Paget's disease. And he had deformities in his long bones of his legs and in his head. And the bone, as those osteoblasts build the bone, it gets thick and scalloped. Normally when they lay down bone, they lay it down in long ridges, and I have a video that I'll show you in just a moment explaining these ridges. And in Ergel's case, and in other cases of Paget's disease, the bone is laid down in a really scalloped sort of a way that's not structurally normal. So the bone won't shatter down a line, it absorbs the impact. Treatment for Paget's disease is, you know, surgery now, of course, if the disease is very well progressed. It's basically treated really similarly to osteoporosis. They want you to get exercise, physical therapy, and all kinds of things like this. So basically there's really nothing they can do. There are some drugs that they're working on to try and control how much of the bone gets laid down, but basically it's not too happy of a disease to have. As far as massage goes, it is indicated. You need to be careful with the elderly because the bone can be more prone to breaking in some situations and less prone to pain sensations in others. So you want to make sure that you're part of the medical team, and especially because most Paget's disease is diagnosed in elderly patients, you really want to make sure that you're on the ball with the team. Okay, so now I'm going to show you really quickly, before we go back inside and I show you Ergel's video, that the snowcats are grooming Aspen Mountain. Look! Can you see them up there? Yay! And that's the ice skating rink on the right. Alright.